Welcome to our second webinar on port development in Indonesia. This series is organized by the Coordinating Ministry for Maritime Affairs and Investment in Indonesia and the Netherlands Ministry for Infrastructure and Waterways. STC, Nestra and STC International facilitate this dialogue, and we are very grateful to financial support received from the RVO, Netherlands Enterprise Agency. Without their assistance, this dialogue would not have been possible. The overarching aim of our series is to generate inputs to Indonesia's endeavors to revisit its port development strategy. Especially in the wake of COVID-19, there is an urgent need to see to what extent strategies and plans remain relevant and to what extent plans need to be revised. Today we focus on a topic which is a very hot issue today, and I guess that's the reason why we got so much traction, so much interest for this webinar, also from the press, that is on port financing, port investments. And as we all know, the government of Indonesia is facing difficult times in trying to continue funding its port development, both existing ports as well as new ports, green ports. So therefore, we hope that our discussion today and the presentation can contribute to sharpen our insight, to improve our insight into what works, what does not work, and what might be feasible strategies to move forward. In particular, today, we would like to discuss sustainable port development, to assess to what extent sustainable port initiative needs specific funds to promote development, or whether we can make use of existing instruments. And this request, we focus on sustainable development because that is the request from the Coordinating Ministry for Maritime Affairs and Investment. We have 4 speakers today. I'm very happy with that. And before I introduce the speakers, one issue. If you have questions or remarks, please send me a chat message, send us a chat message, or use the hand function in on your screen. Preferably, chat function works best, so that would be great. And we start today with some opening remarks by a very new Assistant Deputy Minister in Indonesia. That is Pak Radian Durcahyo, who happens to be an old friend of mine. I knew him when he had another job at the Seknek, yeah, Pak?
Cabinet Secretariat.
Yeah, at the Secretariat, so we met often then. I'm very happy that I can meet you again today. And I understand that you, on behalf of your ministry, would like to present some opening remarks. Pak Radian, silakan, please.
Thank you very much, Henry Sandi. Distinguished speaker, distinguished participant, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon in Indonesia, good morning in Netherlands. Welcome to our second webinar on port development, organized by the Coordinating Ministry for Maritime Affairs and Investment in Indonesia and Ministry for Infrastructure and Waterways in the Netherlands. We are grateful to support provided by the Netherlands Embassy in Jakarta and the Indonesian Embassy in The Hague. We would also like to thank STC Rotterdam for facilitating the series of webinars. And we would like to thank RFO of the Netherlands for providing financial support. Our first webinar provided a general overview of the challenge to port development and the maritime sector in Indonesia. In particular, the first webinar discussed the growing importance of smart port, the challenge for seafarers in the pandemic, and the role that ports may play in the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. We welcome more than 100 participants from Indonesia, the Netherlands, and other countries. Today, we will concentrate on a key issue of strengthening the port sector in Indonesia. A recent assessment by the Ministry of Transport in Indonesia is that the country needs to less than $47 billion to develop ports across the country. Java itself will require almost $13 billion in new investment. This is an estimate looking at the need to strengthen existing port and develop new port. These estimates are based on a review of the master plan for port. The master plan estimates that some 32% of the investment can be covered by the government of Indonesia. The remaining fund need to be covered by public-private partnership initiative, private sector participation, and donor organization. Therefore, it becomes very important to take a new look at port financing and investment. New sources and strategies are needed to ensure that Indonesia plan to strengthen its port sector can be materialized. There is also a need to discuss how the development of more sustainable port can be funded. Development of sustainable port is important for Indonesia so that it can meet the sustainable development goal. We are happy today that some of today's presentation will also look at the specific challenge that financing sustainable port development brings. We are also happy that one of our presenters today will concentrate on specific cases, such as the construction of the port of Patimban. There is a need to discuss port development in Indonesia in general terms and also via specific case studies such as Patimban. We hope you will enjoy today's presentation and discussion. We wish our speaker good luck and thank you for your attention. Please enjoy the webinar and once again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Radian. Thank you very much. Terima kasih banyak. I would like now to give the floor to our first speaker. That's another old friend of ours, Ibu Amin Nur Jana. Normally we call her Ibu Ani. Ibu Ani was born in Boyolali in Central Java, and she has been working for the Directorate Ports and Dredging for quite some time already. She's really becoming an expert there. And she studied port management at the World Maritime University in Sweden. And Ibu Ani, I'm very happy that you will be speaking to us today. Please, Ibu Ani.
Thank you, Pak Henry. Good afternoon and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Directorate of Port Affairs, the Ministry of Transportation, allow me to express our gratitude for having us in this webinar. Through this occasion, I will share a general overview actually for the port financing that has been implemented by our government. It means that not only limited for the commercial port, but also for the non-commercial port. Without any further introduction, let's start to have a look on how we are financing our port. Okay. Wait, I think I have some problem with my laptop here. Sorry.
The presentation is already on our screen, Bu Ani. It looks like.
Yes, but with Pak. Here, ladies and gentlemen, on this slide, we saw the note which represent port in Indonesia. As we know that Indonesia is an archipelagic country, it means that we have a lot of islands, and the sea transportation is a vital role for our economic growth. I don't know, it can be seen on the screen or not, but for the red color are the main port, and blue and green color are the collector port. It means for the regional and for the local port. And then for the existing port, we have more than 600 port. Most of it are small port which are operated non-commercially by government. And the port have been built mainly to provide a gateway for the distribution of cargo to the certain areas, and also to connect between small island and the major areas. And for the commercial ports, it means that the ports are operated commercially to support the trade that mainly operated and managed by state-owned company. It means that PT Pelindo 1, 2, 3, and 4, while for the smaller number are operated by private port operator. Because since the 2008, I think our port are open to the private participation, not only for the state-owned company. And that, as I say, that it's most of the existing port is a small port. I think we need to know that how small port is small port in Indonesia. If we discuss about port, most of us must consider that large scale of port like Tanjung Priok, or maybe that we are built for the Patimban port, and on the top left of the picture is the Belawan port at the North Sumatra. It's categorized as the commercial port. This Belawan port is operated by Pelindo 1, and it has several terminal for passenger ship, container terminal, liquid also for general cargo. However, for the three pictures down below are the small port which are operated non-commercially by government. For the left one is Kawaluso port, is located at Kawaluso Island, far near the border between Indonesia and the Philippines. And the second one is Labuan Uki port at the main island of Sulawesi, and the third one is port of Anggrek in Gorontalo province. It's a non-commercial port, but now we are preparing for the PPP scheme to develop this port. For the non-commercial port, also called as a small port, mostly serve the local economies or as feeders for the larger ports in national port system, or we know as RIPN. And then for the non-commercial port also have roles and function as inter-island connectivity. It promotes local and regional economic growth and provide access to the remote area. It also operated by government as non-profit oriented port. Actually, for the small port, this mostly have limited facilities for the berthing, and its area mostly less than 2 hectares for open yard, sets, passenger terminal, and for the administration office. And the tariff of the services are relatively low. It's set up by government through government regulation, and government provides a budget and subsidies for the small port operation due to the port income relatively very low than compared with the operation cost, and not give a return for the investment. Since the port are not profit oriented, the port construction and the development are economically feasible, but not feasible from the point of view of financial. For this reason, the national or local government budget is the most possible financing source. As the illustration, for the small port, like in West Papua, port of Harapan Jaya, it's the estimated for the whole facility for the port is only need 60 billion rupiah, or maybe around 5 million US dollar, and it's the investment excluded the land acquisition, because normally for the local port, the land, the area for the port is provided by local government. And then for the operating cost, it's estimated around 250 million rupiah, and for the annual income, it's only 160 million rupiah. It means only 64% if we compare with the operating cost. And then how about the commercial port, it's quite different if we compare with the non-commercial port. For the commercial port have role and function mainly to promote national economic growth, to support national trade and logistics system, improve the access to the market. Also, it has a business-oriented port. And for the port financing for the commercial port, the source can come from the government or private or state-owned company. And for the last decade, most of the port development has been done with government budget through loan from international financial institution. And recently, we have just finished to develop the basic infrastructure for container terminal at Pelawan Port that funded by loan from Islamic Development Bank. And then also the basic infrastructure for the Patimban Port at West Java is also built with loan funded by JICA by Japan. And now we are preparing the rehabilitation port at Palu Bay as the affected by earthquake and tsunami in 2018 with loan from Asian Development Bank. And then actually for port investment also can be done by private or state-owned company, either by upgrading the existing facility also, or developing a new port. Actually, the need to significantly upgrade the facility is recognized by the government, and its a new drive is underway as part of the National Infrastructure Master Plan. Currently, the government promoting some scheme for port financing, and then under the shipping law, the government opening up the port sector to private sector, not only to the state-owned company, and for the business. Port business entity, either from the private sector or state-owned company, can build and operate port through the concession agreement with the port authority. And then, like for the commercial port, the existing condition we have around 111 that managed by Pelindo 1, 2, 3, and 4. And also, apart from this existing concession by Pelindo, also another new concession is we have 20 concession agreement between government and the port operator for the management of the port. It's like for the total investment around 7 billion US dollar. It's for the development and operation new port or terminal, also the channel operation in Surabaya. Apart from the concession scheme, government also promote the PPP scheme to involve private from port financing. Since the presidential decree number 38 2015 that issued, we have around 48 PPP projects from our sector that are already in pipeline. Ministry of Transport also keen to promote a PPP project for port financing. One of the reasons because the government budget is very limited. It attracts the investment from private sector, and government budget will be optimized for financing small port which economically feasible yet financially not feasible. Besides, another benefit are mostly investment projects are implemented in due term and do not impose unforeseen government expenditure. Currently, we just finished selection of port operator for Patimban Port. The model of the PPP is procure, operate, and transfer. It means that for the basic infrastructure, that is land reclamation, breakwater, are provided by government, and the port operator will provide the equipment and for maintenance the facility and the management to operate the car and container terminals. Apart from Patimban, now Port of Anggrek is under preparation for PPP scheme, which considered as brownfield project since it will operate and transfer for the existing non-commercial ports, which in the recent years has been so significant growth of cargo. estimation for the investment proportion, government will bear 180 million rupiah, and for the additional basic infrastructure, and the private will be expected to invest around 1.2 trillion rupiah within 3 years concession agreement. Now we will have a look at the opportunity, challenge, and constraint in the port financing. Like we know that through the PPP project, for the private sector, it's possible to have idea to have a new project in the port sector. Like it will be accommodated by government, and then also it's possible for the foreign investment, and then we are trying to simplify the regulation and the licensing process. And apart from this opportunity, we also see that some challenge we have to consider, like cargo guarantee, and then land acquisition process. As we know, like in the Pontianak terminal gauging, for the land acquisition process, it's need more than, I think, more than 2 years, but up to now it's still in process. I haven't finished yet. And then also we need like the hinterland connectivity that to support the port itself, and then simplification of a PPP process. Maybe like we know that we will have speaker Pak Louis Bram. He know exactly how to prepare the Tanah Ampo, and now Tanah Ampo is like one of project that failed to continue. It's not it's like unsuccessful experience for us, but thank that now we will hopefully will success for the Patimban PPP project. For the simplification of the PPP process, it's like most of the consideration to continue the PPP scheme. Like we know to prepare and continue to transaction for the PPP process, it's need, I think, around 2 or 3 years. It means that some of the private sector will hesitate to participate in the PPP process. I think this all of our presentation, it can be shared in this occasion. We will come for the input for the participant this occasion. Thank you, Pak.
Still mute, Pak Henry.
I'm still muted, I understand, but now I switch it on again. Then we received 2 questions for you while you were speaking, and let me just pick out one question. This is from Pa Rudy Purba. He is at Purba Consultancy, and he asked, has the COVID-19 pandemic has big influence on your port development strategy? Please, Bu Ani.
Yes, Pak. I think it's for the COVID-19, it has like big impact for the Patimban port development, particularly on the PPP process, because our FBC document had been done on 2016. It's need to be adjust because of this COVID-19 for the demand almost, I think, 30% below. So it's mean quite have a lot impact on the port development.
Okay, thank you very much, Bu Ami. For the sake of time, I would like to move now to our second speaker. Well, in fact, you introduced him already, Pak Louis Bram, who is a senior consultant at the Weppel Group Advisory. He studied at Erasmus University in Rotterdam. He is from the Netherlands, but he lives at the moment in Jakarta. Pak Louis, please.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Happy to see you all in this big number during this webinar. Let me start up the screen sharing. So I hope it's visible for everyone. Henry, can you confirm?
It's very visible. Paper.
Okay, good. So good afternoon again. So allow me to briefly introduce myself. My name is Louis Braan. I work for Rebel, and Rebel is a company that specializes in infrastructure development, procurement and finance. We are not only advisors, but we also manage an European infrastructure investment fund. And we are equity investors ourselves in PPP projects, especially in highways, renewable energy and water and flood management infrastructure. We have a dedicated port and logistic division. Some colleagues of mine, Wim Welvaarts and Jean-Paul Verhoeven, are also on the webinar. And they work from Rotterdam and Antwerp. So they work as economic, financial, procurement advisors, but are also active in innovations like blockchain, cold ironing, port as a service, and they have developed a comprehensive port toolbox which allows you to assess the situation of the port and develop dedicated development plans. Well, as mentioned, I'm in Indonesia, I'm in Jakarta, and essentially since 2011. And as Bu Amy already explained, I've been involved in, I think, an early day PPP attempt for Tanah Ampo cruise terminal. But since then, I think we have worked together with several institutions like Bappenas, the Ministry of Finance, IIGF, SMI, the Ministry of Public Works, the Ministry of Transport, so many institutions that are active in developing PPPs in Indonesia. And especially our experts have also been involved in, I think, many port projects, up to 8 or 9 port projects in the last 10 years in Indonesia. So to the subject of the PPPs and port development, and as I think, as we all know, Indonesia has been pursuing PPPs for quite some time. And I think since the Jokowi administration took office in 2013, if I'm correct, but in the years after that, at least in certain sectors like toll roads, significant progress has been made. And I think this can also be used to further improve the experience and the results in, for example, the port sector. So what drives PPP development in the port sector or more in the infrastructure sector? Worldwide, we can see that port concessions or terminal concessions are the mainstream model to involve the private sector in port development and port operations. And the motivation to get private sector involvement is about the ability of the private sector to finance infrastructure. So we can find solutions to deal with the budget restriction at the public side. Furthermore, private sector can provide professional operation and maintenance of facilities and better performance in service delivery. And since there are very large private sector operators of port infrastructure, they can also achieve better efficiency and economies. So globally, we see that the big operators like APMT, PSA and Hutchison ports, they have become very specialized in terminal operations. They have access and they can develop integrated networks. And by doing that, they can attract and generate additional volume. And due to their large size, they enjoy economies of scale when they invest in terminals, in ICT systems, etc., etc. So over time, I think terminal operators, they have developed and they can avail over money to invest. And we also see that they are more and more lining up with investment funds, institutional investors. So in that sense, they can bring proposals for port development and can also bring the capital to support and implement their ideas. So that's an opportunity, I think, for Indonesia to make sure that you are able to attract these kind of operators and investors also to Indonesia. So for the governments, also PPPs, there's a possibility to transfer the demand and investment risks to the private sector. But also, I think, as already was pointed out, the COVID-19 pandemic will have some impact and has impacted ongoing operations of both public and private port facilities. So that's something which we have to take into account, that to attract private investment and private finance, governments have to do more to really mobilize private capital. I think what we see worldwide, that the large operators, they can provide for efficient and well-performing ports, and also ports that are able to compete with ports in the nearby region. And I think that developing a couple of well-chosen world-class ports in Indonesia would help Indonesia to compete effectively with neighboring countries, but would also help Indonesia to attract global manufacturing and global industries, so that apart from its large domestic market, a very large manufacturing industry can be further developed in Indonesia. So this slide presents you with the typical port PPP models and privatization models. Well, full private ports are rather scarce globally, but I think in Indonesia at least we see quite some joint ventures, especially between the Pelindos and other terminal operators and private investors. But most of the time when we talk about PPPs internationally, there are more or less 4 types of models, contracts that are applied. So one being the management or service contract, normally up to 5 years, where the private partner does not invest, but only manages a port or port facility based on a performance contract. And then there are lease or rental contracts where the private sector, and they are, well, most of the time 5 to 15 years. Again, the private sector does not invest, but leases facilities that are built and financed by the public sector, by the authority, and then operates these facilities to create revenue and to provide services. Then I think worldwide, the most mainstream model nowadays is a landlord model, where the private sector is involved based on concessions. So these concessions are longer term contracts for 15 to 35 years. The private sector normally invests into terminal facilities, and the authority or the landlord is taking care of the development and the operation and maintenance of the basic infrastructures in the port. And then we also see that a landlord has his own revenue source, its own revenue structures. For example, port dues, berthing charges, land leases, and or royalties of the cargo handling, which is done by the private operators. And the private sector, so the terminal operators, they get their revenue stream from cargo handling itself. So using their terminals and providing services to their clients, the shipping lines, etc. And then the last model, BOT, I think that's very similar to the concession model. But many times we see that the scope of investments may be larger in BOTs and may also include some of the basic infrastructure components like the case, for example. So since investments are larger under BOTs, we also see that the contract duration is normally longer, going from 20 to 50 years. So this picture shows again a bit of the demarcation of investment and operational responsibility under the concession and the BOT model. So what we then normally see is that private sector builds and operates the superstructures like the cranes and other equipment, and also takes care most of the times of the pavement on which these facilities are built, while the public authority or the landlord takes care of the land being available, the quays being built, the dredging of the access channels, as well as having in place the services and facilities to facilitate the port access. So when we talk about the PPP structure and the financing, normally what we see is that a special purpose vehicle or special purpose company is set up, which enters into a contract with the public sector. And in this contract, they are awarded the right to build, rehabilitate, operate the terminals, the cranes, and those facilities, and at the same time are allowed to operate them and to charge fees and tariffs to the users. So that's actually their service provision to the clients, the shippers and the liners, which is also based on the terminal handling and service contracts. In the construction and operation of the terminal facilities, they outsource the construction to dedicated contractors, construction contractors, and also dedicated companies are appointed to operate the facilities under an O&M contract. And then at the right side of this picture, we see that they attract financing from shareholders. So there's equity and there's financiers, lenders who provide debt, so which is attracted to cover their investments into the terminal facilities. So as mentioned, the BOT model and the concessions model are mainstreamed in the field of PPPs. So sometimes we also see that private sector is involved, for example, for providing dredging and building the berths and the quays. And in a very few occasions, we also see that PPP contracts are applied for those kind of infrastructures. So then we more talk about availability payment or design, build, finance, maintain and operate contracts. But worldwide, there are only very few examples of it. And at the same time, those contracts finally rely on the government or the port authority to make annual payments. So it doesn't completely resolve the potential lack of resources, while it comes with rather high financing costs. So this model, availability-based PPPs in Indonesia, has also been attempted in the road sector, but only leading to very few contracts, and especially because of the availability payments being very costly due to the high cost of financing. So then I switch to the international market for port finance. I think this slide provides you with an overview which was taken from the World Bank PPI database. So roughly we see there's 37 billion US dollar of private investment in ports. Geographical, there's quite a large part in Latin America, and East Asia and Pacific is well 18% here, but on further studying the database, I at least find out that almost all the Indonesian concessions which have been developed over the last 10 years are not represented in this database. And since this 18% reflects more or less, let's say up to 7 billion US dollar of investment. But I think that in Indonesia, the investments of the past, let's say 9 years, were roughly also about, I think 6 to 7 billion. So I think East Asia and the Pacific has a larger share if we, for example, take into account the developments in Indonesia. Well, further, as mentioned already, we see that BOTs and build or rehabilitate and operate and transfer contracts are the majority, almost 3/4 of all the PPP models that were used in the past 10 years. And then a lot of the PPPs were into greenfields, and almost 1/3 in brownfield, and then there's some smaller, let's say the remaining 10% is split among lease and management contracts and divestiture.
Sorry, Louis, there are already quite a number of questions for you, so maybe it will be good to finish and then we have some time for a discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think my only signal here is that G20 signals a contraction of the markets for ports and maritime. And as already mentioned, also COVID will have its impact. So government need to pay specific attention to come up with attractive business cases for the private sector to invest in.
The question that I have for Mr. Bram was about how we can deal with uncertainties, especially taking lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic that may have caused unexpected impacts on cargo volume and the demand in the port, and which could lead to also reduction in port revenue and an attractiveness to invest in port itself. So the question is, how can we deal with these in attracting also private investors, them aware about the risk, but also creating a transparent atmosphere and still being able to show the positive sides and the attractiveness of investing in PPP schemes in the Indonesian context. Thank you very much, Pak.
Okay, thank you. Before you answer, Louis, let's go for a second question. And that is from Pa Jacob Sørensen. Jacob, maybe you can raise your question now. Christine, Pa Jacob, we need to unmute. Christine, we need to unmute by Jacob. Yeah, okay. Are you there, Jacob? He's still muted.
So, Pak Jacob, you have to unmute. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Silakan, Jacob.
Yeah, selamat sore, maaf. Yeah, but Luis, I was just raising this question when you showed the pie chart of the investments, and you were explaining some numbers. I think you mentioned $6 to $7 billion of investment to Indonesia. I was just wondering if you have some sort of a grading of attractiveness with Indonesia versus other countries in Southeast Asia.
Okay, thank you. Pa Louis, I suggest you reply first, and then we may see whether we have time for another question or move to the next speaker. Thank you. Pa Louis.
Okay, so first embarking on the question of Pa Halim. So as you pointed out, we have seen that many operations, many concessions have been affected by the global economic slowdown due to COVID. I think that private investors will look for predictability and lower downward risk in the business cases of terminal concessions in the future. That means, I think, even more than nowadays, that in the Indonesian ports, the transparency of the competition and the future developments in ports is going to be very important, so that once you invest in an Indonesian port, you build up the capacity, you exactly, more or less know exactly who are your competitors today and in the near future. And I think from PPP perspective, we will see that I think investors will require more sharing of risks between government and the private investors. So that means that we will have to come up with, well, as mentioned already, cargo volume guarantees, or at least risk sharing mechanisms where at least the downside will also be cushioned by the Indonesian government or the port authorities partially taking part of the losses. So I think that's what investors will, and especially also the banks, will be looking for in the future. Then I think the question of Pa Jacob. So I think what I studied, I saw that in the past 9 years there have almost been I think 16 concessions which have been issued by the Ministry of Transport. And if I'm correct, that covers about $6 to $7 billion US dollars of investments. But what I also see in those figures is that we only see a couple of PPPs, and especially in the more smaller schemes. So Patimban Port, I think, is the exception, where there's a procurement process ongoing, and at least I think there's a combination of domestic investors and international operators lining up for the concession there, for the Ro-Ro and the container terminal. But the other deals were rather small, and if I compare that with some of the projects which have pushed through in for example, Thailand and in Malaysia. I think there we still see that there's a bit more involvement and more foreign investment in those deals. So whether I think I'm not ready to conclude from that point of view that Indonesia is not as attractive. I think potentially Indonesia can be very attractive. But as mentioned, I think the policies have to be more straightforward, conducive. Also the tariffs have to improve. And I think that can be a win-win both for foreign investors and operators, as well as for Indonesia. As I think the country itself is very big, but also its potential to manufacture for the world is certainly there. So I think it's just part of scaling.
Okay, thank you, Louis.
Yeah.
I think but before we go to our next speaker, maybe Ibu Ami, one of the key remarks of Pa Louis was that the policies need to be more conducive if you want to attract high quality foreign investment. Would you like to react to that, Bu Ami?
Yes, thank you, Pa. I think that what already mentioned by Pa Louis is very correct, that we need the guarantee for the private, also foreign investment. Like we know, for the sharing risk, we already have process for the Patimban. It's guaranteed by PTPI, IIGF. It's also will implement it by another project, maybe for this year, for the PPP project Port of Anggrek. Also will supported by PTPI for the government guarantee, I think.
Okay, thank you, Bu Ami. I would like to move to our next speaker, Dr. Arjan Heidra. He is the director and founder of Vital Ports in the Netherlands. He studied and got his PhD from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. And very interestingly, he was also a visiting scholar at the IMT in the United States. Arjan, please.
Well, thank you, Henry. I'm very happy to be here on this webinar. Let's see if I can share my screen and if this all works fine. Okay. Should be okay like this. Could you please confirm?
Yes, perfect.
Excellent, excellent. Well, perhaps a few words about Vital Ports first. Vital Ports is a small organization with the aim to foster sustainable development in the port sector. We do so by working together with a couple of Swiss financial institutions, together with the dredging community, and also with the PIENC, a global port and waterway organization. Our key approach is to convert sustainable development as a cost towards sustainable development as a source of revenues. So then you can scale and you can see an uptake in those projects. That is also where this presentation will be about. So let's get started, I would say. Yes. First, a bit of a financial perspective. 2 news items I got from the internet about the financial sector. I could have stuffed this slide with tens, if not hundreds, of these news items. On the left-hand side, this was a survey from BlackRock that was done last year and came out amongst 425 investors. And respondents in the survey mentioned they were planning to double their sustainable assets under management in the next 5 years. This will, of course, not all be infrastructure related, but it shows the trends. On the right-hand side, that is specifically infrastructure related. There is a news item from last week, so very recent, from the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And it says, by investing in sustainable infrastructure, we will unlock new capital, new technologies, and new ways in which we address climate change and connect Asia internally and with the rest of the world. With that said, two questions arise: where to find such green projects? And the other one is, can such projects be made bankable? And that's also, I will also jump into that. Well, obviously, green projects, you can find them in the energy sector usually, but well, they're also seeking projects in other sectors, infrastructure sectors particularly, and ports might that fit that bill perfectly. Here are some examples. You can see maritime infrastructure like port-related infrastructure. I've divided it here into four domains, for instance, ports and the waters. Then we're talking about land reclamation, terminal development, breakwaters, that kind of things. You can do that conventionally with a lot of concrete and steel, but there are also all kinds of more sustainable variants or hybrid variants, just going a little bit more sustainable. Same counts for ports and their hinterlands. You got the trucking, but often inland waterway transport or short sea shipping is considered as more sustainable. That particularly counts for electrifying railways as well. Ports are often linked to cities. You can think about resilient urban port design as a more sustainable option. Improve living and working conditions, clean air, and ports and energy, well, that speaks for itself, I would say. You could visit our website with quite a lot of more concrete and technical examples, but the internet is full of this, I would say. So, why, as a client, choose for sustainable variants or green projects instead of conventional approaches? Well, there's quite some literature on that as well. So I summed up a few pros and a few cons. Usually sustainable approaches offer a wider societal value, and from the public domain, you could team up with other policy programs and even find co-funding from that. So these 2 points also bring potential in cases to improve cash flows. You might also increase support by stakeholders, which might seem not that important, but please keep in mind that if resistance comes, this can delay the planning process or even obstruct the entire planning process. Sustainable approaches tend to be more resilient, so there's less risk for stranded assets, and it might even open the door to new markets like carbon trading, habitat banking, and even open the door to impact investors not seeking any return on investment anymore. The cons, these kind of solutions are often perceived as more costly. At times it might be more difficult to quantify the cost and benefits, particularly if you're thinking about completely nature-based solutions. Lenders and investors tend to be less familiar with them, and it does indeed require some solid upstream planning, requiring some extra resources and time. Long-term performance might provide some uncertainty as statistics are still limited, and for very specific green capital, you need certification as they need proof that the projects fit the eligibility. Let's jump to the next slide. Well, Louis has gone into more depth of the general structuring of project finance, so I won't go into that deep, but please keep in mind the 2 remarks in the blue box on the bottom, where we say, well, for each kind of project you wish to develop in the port sector, whether you finance this publicly or economically, there are sustainable variants that might be interesting in delivering on the wider policy goals or even drive return on investment. But also please keep in mind, we also mentioned this, that port types are different, and the port structuring determines the ability of a port to generate certain cash flows, to exercise value capturing on the broader societal value. So that brings us to the point of cash flows related to sustainable port development. Well, perhaps it's good to dive a little bit deeper into this with two examples. One typical conventional example on the left-hand side and a more hybrid or even green development on the right-hand side. Typically, business tends to optimize their revenue streams from the users, like a port authority does with shipping and terminal leases. And well, the negative effects or externalities, if you will, tend to be taken a bit for granted as long as it stays within legal limits. So you see a kind of a financial optimization within this port structure, but it's not necessarily economic optimization in a broader sense for society, the region, or the local community. On the right-hand side, you see a picture. So suppose if you take a more sustainable approach. These approaches tend to deliver wider societal value or serve more stakeholder interest in a wider sense. And then usually the conversation goes like, yeah, all nice and fine, but if I have to carry all those extra costs for that and all the others will benefit from it, what will be the use of doing so? And then comes a little bit the trick of what needs to be done. So if wider societal value is generated, the aim would be to find value capturing methods or to use those to have a little bit of this extra societal value as a revenue source or a cash flow towards the port authority itself. So then it becomes worthwhile of investing in those sustainable approaches. Now let's go one step deeper into this. This is a screenshot from a quick scan on green value on the vitalports.org website. It's free to use and it's a little bit to play around with possibilities, not going really in depth. But again, you see on the upper side the different types of port structures. And these typically relate well to specific mechanisms, and the mechanisms can be linked to instruments serving those mechanisms. And those instruments, in their turn, typically link or do not link to specific sustainable benefits in society. So some of these can be used very well for instance, clean air, or human well-being, improved environment. You could, for instance, think about if the air in a city would be cleaner due to specific port development. There tends to be a relation to real estate value, which increases your tax base and provides a bigger revenue stream for the city. So if it will be a public port, that could be a direct revenue stream. But if this will be a private port, you could think about a special economic or financial arrangement to do such things. Well, this might seem a bit of a complicated slide, and perhaps it is. So please ignore all the details. But this is from a recent scan we did for a series of Greek ports that involved Piraeus, Thessaloniki, and Kavala. And well, the approach was a bit different than what's happening in Indonesia, I would say. This was just a quick scan to see where the low-hanging fruit would be in terms of sustainable development, which would pay off quite quickly. So on the left-hand upper side, there you see the port structure, you take that into account, and also what kind of problems are playing out and what kind of sustainable ambitions are stated. You could link that to a whole set of green solutions. There were around 30 solutions tested here, and these typically link to specific financial instruments. And there you see where opportunities may arise for a quick return on investment, which makes it attractive for certain types of investments. And on the right-hand side, you see a bar chart where you see that specific instruments tend to be very useful for a variety of these preferred solutions, which might pay off of paying attention to these instruments and building them out. This is a little bit of a quick scan, a qualitative scan, so quantification could follow, for instance, using the Sustainable Asset Valuation Instrument as developed by the International Institute of Sustainable Development, which also leads to a bankable format, quantified and bankable format, which is typically understood by banks. So this is just to give short of an example. Well, some suggestions for the maritime infrastructure development in Indonesia. Well, it could pay off to assess projects on the potential green return on investment improvement by value capturing instruments. But perhaps this is a big one, evaluate port organizational structures to capitalize on this wider societal value. Maybe not directly changing everything, but an assessment would provide more insight. In terms of structuring, please keep in mind, if you follow a do no harm principle, you can avoid exclusion from the more sustainable funds, particularly as these are ramping up quickly. And for the smaller projects, it might pay off to build an investment pipeline of a multitude of similar projects with a similar risk profile to gain interest from specific investors or lenders. Then some specials. This might be interesting for Indonesia as well, as there are many smaller ports and perhaps very dependent communities. You could call this kind of community ports. And there are a lot of common pool resources in the rich Indonesian waters. So this could naturally link to green or blue financial facilities, or even impact investors wishing to make a change, for instance, in the coral reefs, fish stocks, seagrass, that kind of things. That brings me to my last slides, and I summed up a few references and a sample of green financial facilities. Perhaps this can be shared amongst the participants here. I'd like to bring under your attention the first two bullets of the references. Currently, we're working on guidelines to attract green finance for nature-based navigation infrastructure under the PIANG flag, with participation from various countries. And soon, my guess is in the next 2 months, the second bullet, there will be delivered a report on the finance of sustainable marine and freshwater infrastructure. We're doing this jointly with the Central Dredging Association and the International Association of Dredging Companies, with contributions from Swiss Re and B Capital Partners in Switzerland. And this also will give examples, real-life examples on how to capture this value and to make this all working. Well, with having said that, this is what I wanted to share with you, and I hope it was of any help.
Thank you very much, Pa Arjen. I hope you can now stop sharing screen with us. And there is a question from Pa de Vertes. I think he's based in Ambon now, who has a keen interest on waste management and the funding of waste management in ports. Pa de Vertes, you are still here with us. Maybe you can unmute yourself and ask your question directly, please.
I don't know if you mean me, because there are a lot of
Yes.
the freighters in Ambon.
I mean you.
Okay, well, I'm in The Hague at this moment.
Okay.
And, I'm not in the waste, but I'm in the counterterrorism and security field. And my concern is about the International Ship and Port Security Code, because every harbor port who is allowed to export, and for the bigger ships above the 500 brutto registered tons, they need to be certified according to the International Ship and Port Security Code. That means if you want to develop the tourism in Maluku or in the other outer skirts of Indonesia, those ships are not allowed to enter a port because they're not certified. So I'm for 6 years already trying to implement and educate security in Indonesia. Especially that was a request from a cousin of mine named James Talakua, who is the president of FORKAMI, the Forum Komunikasi Maritim Indonesia. And he said it is very poor with the security at the ports, and also with smuggling of explosives. It is very common now that it's easy to smuggle explosive and transport explosive disguised as clay for children during the Mudik. So there is a big risk, and I talk also with investors here in the Holland, and they say, yeah, we know about the situation, and of course we like to invest to help Indonesia to develop, but the risk is so high for us because they're very vulnerable for terrorism. So how is the attention for Indonesia for the ISPS certification? That's actually my question.
Okay, thank you. I'm quickly looking at, there's another question from Pa atau Ibu Rangga. Now I lost it. Is Pa Rangga or Ibu Rangga? If you're there, please raise your hand so that I can ask you, give you the floor. Yeah, are you there? If not, then I would like to go to Pa.
Yeah, okay, Pa Henry.
Okay, please.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you, Pa Henry. Good morning, Pa Arjan. So it's interesting with the presentation about the green financing. But as we know in Indonesia, some financial institutions, particularly banks, are still a little bit conservative in the concept of green financing. They do provide a lot of good lectures in universities, but in terms of the practice, there still needs to work on the proposition on financing green infrastructures. So based from your experience in several ports in Greece and other Mediterranean countries, what would be the proposition for banks to invest in the green financing scheme? Thank you, Pa Henry.
Thank you. It's a nice question. Pa Arjan, please, if you would like to respond.
Well, first and foremost, I have to admit this is a field in full development. It gains a lot of traction also from the financial side. And one of the main issues the financial institutions are struggling with is that they see all kind of financial green investments, but it's kind of diffused in all kind of smaller projects. And bundling this would be highly appreciated by that side and would be a practical step to go forward. And a second remark we are getting back from those institutions is, well, investors are a little bit hesitant for greenwashing of projects, just giving it a green profile or sustainable profile, but not necessarily being actual sustainable. So it's a practical step could also be introducing or using a kind of certification or a clear criteria where projects needs to which projects need to fit, so it's clear for everybody what projects are delivering in terms of green development and what they are not delivering. So this will be basic steps. There are lots of development in many of the other issues, like the uncertainty in long-term performance, for instance, or the quantification. So I'm not too concerned that will hold things back for now or in the near future. So this could be practical steps, I think.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking at my watch, and let's move to the next speaker, our last speaker. And maybe after that we have some time for discussion. Our last speaker is Pak Siswanto Rusdi. He's the director and founder of the National Maritime Institute in Indonesia. He holds that function since 2007. Pak Rusdi studied in Singapore at the Nanyang Technology University. Pak Siswo, please unmute yourself, and the floor is yours. I hope you managed to scare stage. We had a discussion about it this morning, so hopefully it works. Please, Pak.
Thank you, Pa Henry. Thank you. Could you share my presentation?
Okay, Ibu Christine, can you please share the presentation of Pak Rusdi?
Yes, Pa Henry.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Bu Christine.
Great. Yeah. Please, Pak.
Yes, still running.
Yeah, please,
okay.
Pak.
I'm trying to be short. This next question and next slide, please. Okay. How to? Sorry, Pak.
Yeah.
Can
just say next every time you want us to move to the next slide. Yeah. You don't have to do anything.
I cannot.
What? You don't have to move your slides. We will do it for you. So.
Okay, Pak. Yes.
Yeah. Just you can start.
Okay. Please, the next.
Next slide.
Yes. Thank you, Pak Henry. Hello, everyone. My name is Siswanto. I'm a director and founder of the National Maritime Institute. This is a kind of think tank, independent think tank, because we do by our own resource, everything. So we are quite independent for that. Next slide, please. Yes, where? Can you move to the next slide?
Next again.
Bu Christine or Pak Henry, maybe you can help me?
Yes,
Okay.
Pak, is this the correct slide?
All right. This is the correct one. Okay. Indonesia. Okay. We have three port business cluster in Indonesia. One is Pelindo, and then Ministry of Transport, especially small port, non-commercial port, and then private. We have like Maspion, and then Krakatau Steel, and then Samudra Indonesia. We have an hybrid. I mean, the owner of the port maybe government or local government cooperating with the private sector. In terms of port financing, Pelindo use their internal sources to develop their own port. They also get bank loan too fast. Can you back? Can you back?
Slide yang mana, Pak Siswanto?
Can you back, Bu?
Okay.
Slide nomor 2, Bu. Nomor 2.
Slide nomor 2.
Yang masih Pelindo. Pelindo.
Slide nomor
2 halaman.
Setelah. Oke. Okay. Yang ini, Pak, internal source, bank loan.
Bukan. Iya, iya. Terus, Bu. Ini lagi? Kecepatan ini. Ini kecepatan.
Berarti saya coba balik ke halaman pertama, nanti Bapak next
lagi,
ya,
Bu,
Pak?
ini udah, jadi setelah nomor...
Ini
iya.
pertama.
Iya, iya. Baik, Bu. Baik.
Oke. Ini next ya, Pak?
Terus lagi, Bu.
Ya.
Iya, mundur lagi. Mundur lagi.
Ini sudah slide pertama, Pak, introduction.
Iya. Terus, Bu, masih
maju. Kalau
tapi di layar saya kok anu ya.
Oh, di layarnya.
Di layar saya belum muncul.
I think it's freeze in Pak Siswanto screen, Pak Henry.
Yeah, so Pak Siswanto, let's just do this. Maybe you can, without looking at your PowerPoint, also given at the time, give just a brief explanation of your main points. Let's forget about the PowerPoint.
Yes,
yeah?
then we will.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so Pelindo use many sources to develop their ports, bank loan, global bond, and sometimes government also provide a budget for Pelindo. For example, Benoa Port, the biggest cruise center for Indonesia, especially in the eastern part of Indonesia. They got a government, what we call penyertaan modal pemerintah or government budget, and then Ministry of Transport, as described earlier by Ibu Ami, also develop their own port projects, mostly by APBN or state budget, and currently they are offering several ports under the scheme of PPP, but I think it is very difficult to get investor attention because the port, to the investor basically is a small port, and then the quality of the planning is very bad because actually the port just JP at the first time, and then maybe they have a certain growth of trading, and the government, especially Ministry of Transport, want to expand, want to upgrade, so they ask investors to come in. And then we have also private port operator like Maspion, Krakatau Steel, Samudra. They also have their own internal resources, and currently by the issuance of several port permit, we also have a port paper port company. They don't have asset, they don't have human resource, they only have paper. The government give them paper to operate port, and this cluster of port is badly need investor, badly needs of investment from every players if they can. And then we also have a hybrid port. Kendal port in Central Java is a kind of this type. The port is initiated by Pelindo 3 Surabaya in cooperation with Kendal administrations. But it seems that all the investments will be coming from Pelindo because local administration, they don't have a budget for port business. Even they don't have human resource to handle port administration, or even and then we also have another PPP project, Patimban Port project, and now the government already appointed City Corp as a operator, but we still have to wait this consortium to manage the port, because the government seemingly confused whether this is should be transferred immediately to the consortium, or still managed by KSOP Patimban. And for that, the government already appointed Pelindo 3 Surabaya as temporary operator. So this is, we have some kind of fusion in Patimban due to who is the exact operator of the port. I want to conclude this presentation to have more question after that. In Indonesia, port financing, the government, especially Ministry of Transport, is the boss. I mean, they design, they finance, and then sometimes they transfer their project to the third party, whether it is interesting or not. I think they don't think of that, and then we have very limited capacity in the hands of local government. Local government don't have budget, don't have human resource. They always asked by the central government to provide land for projects. Only that they don't get better like revenue. They don't have revenue from bigger port in the area. I think that's my presentation, Henry.
Yeah.
Thank you
very much, Pak Susanto. I'm looking at my clock again. I just see that we have shared your presentation. There was still a question from Pak Muhammad Muslim. I understand he's still with us. Pak Muhammad, can you maybe unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hello, Pak Henry. Thank you for the opportunity, and hello, everyone. My name is Muhammad Muslim. I'm from Ali Budiarjo Nugroho Reksodi Putra Counselor at Law firm in Jakarta. I think I would like to address my question to Louis. First question is, yeah, we are often provide advice to clients from legal perspective, and I would like to learn more from the commercial perspective about port operation. My first question is, how long do you think concession period need to be granted to investor in order to ensure a fair returns, and what kind of factors that you need to consider to accept concession period terms in a concession agreement? And the second question is whether there is any, have you ever come across with any arrangement that allows private sector to get involved in works usually done by the port authority, such as dredging works for maintaining shipping lane, for instance? I think that's all my question.
Thank you very much. Let's see whether there are any more questions. Pak Irwan, you're normally very vocal. I'm pretty sure you have a question too for us, Pak Irwan. Please. Pak Irwan Habsya.
Irwan Habsya or?
Yeah, ayo. Any question from your side, Pak?
No, I don't have any specific questions. It's just I'm learning from how the port are financing at the moment. And I'm interested to know more about the vital port, where you can actually look more into how a project could be feasible or not, having that publication of vital ports, which I saw just now. So no, at the moment, I don't have any specific questions for Henry.
Okay, thank you. Pak Radian from the coordinating ministry. I know you're new to the job, but perhaps this discussion has inspired you to.
Thank you, Henry Sandi.
Please.
Yeah, that's I think it's for infrastructure project in Indonesia is the concern of the Mr. President, because especially the connectivity infrastructure. For example, like Patimban and Kicing, but the planning of the government, especially for Patimban and Kicing, is not only the infrastructure for the port, but also the special economic zone. They have a plan to create like a economic special zone. So For example, like in Patimban, the local government have a master plan that will create one of the biggest special economic zone in Indonesia. So it is impossible that the financial support from the mechanism like PPP can support not only the port of the Patimban but also the economic special zone in the Patimban area. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I know that Pat Daniel van Tuyl is also joining us. He's done a lot of work on ports in Indonesia. Perhaps, Pat Daniel, if you would like to raise a question, this is the opportunity. Would you like to?
Yeah, sure. I have just, I have a lot of questions, and thank you for spurring this discussion. And I think there's a lot of issues around the port tariff reform, and that a root issue of port financing moving forward is actually port tariff reform, but that would require a special session. But my main question is actually to the last speaker, because we're talking here about Patimban. And the thing that fascinates me is that if we look at Patimban, there's now a lot of attention on the car terminal being almost completed. But when you look actually at the revenue stream of a car terminal, it's actually a very limited revenue stream compared to a container terminal. So to really get Patimban financially interesting to the next phase, you need to develop a container terminal. At the same time, we're seeing that in New Priok phase 2, also there is the ability to bring 2 new container terminals to the market. So if you actually look in the DKI sort of Metro Jakarta region, so in which I see DKI Jakarta and large parts of West Java, so you're actually looking at the hinterland of Indonesia's largest economic center, you actually have a situation where you have a oversupply potentially. So you have to deal with a substantial demand risk, something that we haven't seen actually in the past, because in the past, most port development in Indonesia was actually as a response to need to bring in capacity to the market, as there was I would say an overutilization of the port. Now you're actually dealing with a completely different situation where you go into a situation of underutilization. So I'm very interested in what his advice would be moving forward on dealing with demand risks, and then particularly in container terminals in Greater Jakarta region. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Daniel. I think that last question is also relevant to Bu Ami, who is still with us. But let's start with the question addressed to Pa Louis, please.
Okay, thank you, Pa Muhammad. So your question regarding the concession term, so the length of the concessions. I think what occurs to me that in the concessions which were issued in the last 10 years, I think they were almost 40 years and up, even up to 70 years. So personally, I think that in Indonesia, the length of the concessions is very long. And that might be reflective of the uncertainty which is surrounding them. But if we go back to the factors which have to deal with the length of the concession, of course, it's the scope and the characteristics of the infrastructures that have to be built and their economic life cycle. That's one important factor. But I think also that the investor knows about what to expect about the competition in which he is in. Tariff development, already pointed out, I think a very important factor. So if you put all these things together, and normally you do that by building your business case, your financial model, and you start running the risk and the sensitivities, then I think that that gives you more the answer of what is the required duration of concessions. And personally, I think I'm not so in favor to deal with all kind of uncertainties by just extending the duration of the concession, because for the financing and for the return on investment, those are not the critical factors. So I think the answer would be much more in for the government and the Ministry of Transport, the Port Authority, to make the future for the investors a bit more predictable. And I think what we already discussed today, risk sharing mechanisms, for example, might also help to take out risks from the transactions. So in my point of view, we should look at the ability to shorten the duration of the concessions, as it also gives more control back to the Ministry of Transport and the Port Authority on, yeah, let's say the future developments. And I think your second question related to private sector involvement in other projects than terminal development.
Yeah,
so worldwide, and I was once involved when I was still working in the Dutch Ministry of Finance in the development of the second Maasvlakte project. There we try to get private sector involvement in the basic infrastructure, in the land reclamations, etc. All in all, I think if you look at the magnitude of terminal investments and how large they are and all the uncertainties that are involved, it is not a viable route to offload the infrastructure development, basic infrastructure development, to your concessionaires or BOT concessionaires. That model doesn't work that well. I've come across a project in Vancouver in Canada, where I think the berth and the quay were developed by one private investor under PPP contract based on availability payments. And then the Port Authority issued a separate contract for the terminal, and then used its royalty income and other income to pay for the other PPP contract. But rumor says that in practice it's all a bit of complicated structures. And now, honestly, I'm not completely aware, but I think in Surabaya with the dredging, that there the contractor was at least asked to provide financing for pre-financing for the dredging works. And at some point there was discussion about a possibility to look at the canal dredged as a kind of toll road. But I'm not sure whether that took effect, but maybe someone else on this webinar can tell us.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm looking at the time. Maybe before we almost have to close our meeting, Pak Siswanto, maybe you can unmute yourself. And the question of Pak Daniel, are you not afraid that we are facing overcapacity or in oversupply with Palembang and also the extension of the Jakarta port? What is your opinion, Pak?
Yes, indeed. We have an oversupply problem. Don't forget, Maspion already in cooperation with DP World to construct a new terminal, container terminal, of which the throughput will be 3 million something TEUs, and then Pelindo 3 also have plan to construct new terminal, container terminal, I mean, in cooperation with AKR in Gresik. So we have our supply problem on Java Island, Pak Henry and Pak Daniel. And if we look at that private port in Banten, they also handle container. Government already permitted private port to handle general cargo, to handle general container. So we have more capacity than the container itself. Thank you, Pak Henry.
Okay. Bu Ami, maybe you can unmute yourself. Is the Ministry of Transport concerned about this potential oversupply, or what's your view on this, Bu Ami?
Yes, but if we have a look at the development of Tanjung Priok through the Kalimbaru and also the Patimban, yes, we also considering about the over capacity. However, from our study that the market for the Patimban, it's assumed that will for around 26% the Priok, and then the other will focus on the Karawang area, and it means that it's not highly intersection the hinterland area for the Patimban and the Priok, and then now also government try to develop the Batang industrial area. We hopefully it also will use Patimban as the port to export and the import. And then regarding the car terminal, it's not fully feasible for the financial if we give to the private sector. The PPP scheme for the Patimban, it's a bundling, Pak. Not only car terminal, but the port operator will operate the car terminal and also the container terminal, because the container terminal, I think it's more feasible that compared to the car terminal. Thank you, Pak.
Okay. Thank you very much. Oops. I know that there are more questions, but I'm afraid that we have to stop now. We started at 3. It's almost 5 o'clock now. I'm sorry. Before we say goodbye, just like after our first meeting, I kindly ask you to switch on your camera so that we can make a group photo of all of us, and we can then later share that with you. I would be very happy. Thank you very much. And in the meantime, maybe I can ask Pak Radian maybe to say have a few closing remarks. Silakan Pak Radian. So please, if you have time, if you have an opportunity, please switch on your camera.
Thank you very much. I'm really appreciating this webinar that is very important for us, especially for our government, because the infrastructure, especially infrastructure for connectivity, is concerned by the President of the Republic of Indonesia. So as we discuss about the financing scheme, this is very important for us, because our President is invite a lot of investors to come, especially the investment in the port in Indonesia. Especially Indonesia also have a plan to create like a super hub in the next future. Maybe when we discuss a super hub, we will discuss in the different time. I think that's my closing remark. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Then selamat sore semuanya. Thank you for joining us, and looking forward to see you at the next webinar next month. Thank you. Bye-bye.